So in our previous video, we talked about how one of the keys to success for this course is understanding the code that you write. Because if you can't understand what's going on in your app, it's going to become very frustrating and very difficult for you to debug issues that come up or add new features. So in this video, we're going to go into specific examples of how we can practice this skill and how we can make sure that we actually understand the code that's in our app. So the first thing that I want to bring up is that you always want to avoid just blindly copy and pasting code that works. So what that means is a lot of times when I'm coding, I might just be trying out different things and changing a method here or there just to see what happens, and if it works, the process kind of stops there, right? I'm like, oh, it works, great, I can stop here. But what we want to make sure is we don't do that. We want to take the extra time to actually understand what our code is doing. And a great way to do that is to write comments. So if you have comments in your code, it really helps you gain a better understanding of what the code is trying to accomplish. And if you have code and you actually try to go back and write comments and you realize, hey, I don't actually know what comments I should write for this, that's a good sign that you should probably do some research and look up what different things mean in order to actually understand what your code is doing. Another great thing about writing comments is it helps you understand what your past self was doing. So what I mean by this is a lot of times we'll write a feature and then we won't visit it again for another week. And then we come back a week later and we're like, what was I trying to do there? What is this variable even mean? And what was my thought process going on here? So writing comments is a great way to kind of just remind yourself what you were going through when you're writing this feature and give you a better understanding of how your whole code base works. So we're going to be taking a look at a specific example in order to work through how we might practice this skill. So the example we're going to look at is, imagine we're working on our to-do app and we want to add the feature to let users edit a task. So if you recall, this is letting users click on a specific item in their to-do list and then bringing them to a new screen where they can edit the item and then bring it back to the main screen so they can see that their edits have been made. So the first thing we want to start off by doing is to think about what we actually need to do. So this isn't even starting to write code yet. This is kind of just us mapping out our mental model and knowing the steps that we need to take in order for this to actually happen. So the first thing that we realize we're going to have to do is we need an on-click listener for each item, right? So we need to attach this on-click listener so that when the item is clicked, we are able to process this click and we're able to take users to the new edit screen. And once we will launch the new edit screen, we also need to pass it the screen that the user originally clicked on because we want to show them the original screen so they can make edits to it. And once we have that in the new edit screen, we also need some kind of like done button or save button so that when the user clicks on it, we know, oh, hey, it's time to get out of this edit screen and go back to the main screen. And also we need to pass back the newly edited string so we can persist that edit. And lastly, in our main activity, once we've done all that and we're back on our main screen, we need to get back the result of the edit and actually update our local list of items. But now you may realize we kind of have a problem because how do we know which item to update at this point? Because in step 1, we kind of just launched a new screen and we passed it the item. Now we're back in step 4 and we don't even know which item was originally clicked on. So the great thing about mapping out your mental process before you even start writing code is you can help yourself catch bugs before you actually even write code, and it will make things a lot easier to fix. So now we realize, hey, in step 1 we actually had to save the item's position as well, so that back in step 4 we actually know which item to update. So the first approach I would take here is usually when I have a good mental model mapped out, I want to translate my thought process into comments. So I want to be able to put my comments into code that I know can be written, and I want to be able to put my comments in the appropriate places so I know where I would go about writing that code. So how I would go about doing that is, in this first example, we have two activities, the main activity and the edit item activity. So in the main activity, the first thing we needed to do was to set an on-click listener for each item, right? So that's my first comment. I need to set an on-click listener for each item in the list. And inside this on-click listener, I'm going to need to do two things. I need to pass edit item activity, the string that needs to be edited, and I also need to save the position of the item that the user clicked on. And this is so that we can update the right item later. And then the last thing I need to do in main activity is in the onActivity result method, I need to grab the updated string that edit item activity passed me, and I need to actually update my local list of items. And then in edit item activity, I need to get the string that was passed from main activity, and I need to display this original string in some kind of edit text view. And the second thing I need to do in edit item activity is I need an on-click center for a done button so that we can pass back the newly edited string to main activity, and so that edit can be persisted and shown to the user. So the first thing I want to do is let's go through the code that we would write for a main activity. And before I even do that, I just have the comments in there so I know, hey, what pieces of code need to go here. And I translated our comments here and I put it here. And now I'm going to translate it into actual code. So the first thing was we need to set it on click listener, right? And I do that here with setting on item click listener for my list view. So this just lets me recognize when a user has tapped on a specific item and be able to process that and do things. Once I do that, the first thing we need to do was add an activity, the string that needs to be edited. And do that here with an intent, and I pass it the string by putting in an extra with the key old item here. And the second thing we needed to do was we need to save the position. And in order to do this, I created a new variable called editing item position, and then I set that editing item position variable to the position of the item that the user clicked on. And if you remember, back when we were going through the steps that we needed to take, the 4-step process now, we're in edit item activity. So let's not worry about on activity result yet. So let's go into what we need to do. Oh, so the last thing that we need to do in main activity is we actually need to start the activity, right? So right now we've only set up everything. The last thing we need to do is actually start the activity. And now we're going to go into edit item activity. So what code will we write in edit item activity? So in on create, we wanted to get the string that was passed to us from main activity and display it in the edit text view. So the code for that would be like this. So I have my comment, and then now I start to write the code for it. And then secondly, I need to set an on-click listener for the done button to pass back the newly edited string. So with that, I use an on-click listener for the save button, and then I create a new intent, and I put some extra items in it. So finally, we're back in our main activity, and this is the last step of our process, right? And what we need to do is implement code for on activity results. So this is the method that's called once edit item activity finishes. So the thing that we said we needed to do is we need to grab the updated string in order to display it and update it in our local list of items. And I'm doing that here by basically getting the string that was passed to us with the correct key. So that was the approach that I would take if I started out by writing comments first. So if I knew exactly what I need to do, it's very easy for me to kind of just map it out and then write comments in the appropriate classes and then go about writing code. But what would you do if you have code that already works? So this is the example where you're like, I have no idea how to go about this. So then you go online and look for resources, or you watch a video and you see what you need to do. And you have the code that works and it all works, but now you're going back and you're like, I want to make sure that I actually understand each line of code that I write. And so now we're going to look at how we could tag our code with comments to make sure we actually understand it. And the thing here is, it's very hard to actually just understand code by reading it, right? Sometimes there are methods, you're not sure what the method exactly is doing or why a certain method needs to be called at all. So the thing to note here is if you don't actually understand the code, it's great to just look up guides and Google around and see, hey, what does this method do? What does this mean? And by being able to research how these different methods work, it'll help you bridge the gap of understanding that you need. So for example, let's pretend we're working again on the same exact feature. We're trying to let users edit a task. And now we have some code that works. And now we're going to go back and try to tag it with comments. So this is our main activity, if you recall. We have this on item click listener. And what we want to do is we wanted to add a on click listener for it so that when the user clicks on an item, we take users to a new screen, right? But let's pretend we have no idea how this line of code works. How do we go about tagging with some comments? So the first thing we look at is, okay, what does set on item click listener do? If I'm not sure what that actually does, I would literally just Google Android set on item click listener. And hopefully that will give me some very helpful guides or Stack Overflow answers. And hopefully from there I could figure out, oh, okay, this whole block of code is basically saying that when an item is clicked, we want to do some stuff. And then the next block of code is like, okay, inside on the item click method, the first thing we did is we create a new intent. And I might be thinking, I'm not sure what an intent in Android does. So at this point I would go, oh, okay, what does an Android intent mean? And what are these different arguments? What does it mean when the first argument is main activity and the second argument is edit item activity? And hopefully from there I can figure out, oh, okay, this is basically Android's way of saying, hey, it has an intention of wanting to go to edit item activity. So this is us preparing to go to edit item activity. And then now we want to actually also send the string to edit item activity. So now I'm like, oh, okay, what does Android's intent put extra do? And this is when I would go and maybe like Google around or read guides on Android intent put extra. And then from there, hopefully I can figure out, oh, okay, when I do something like put extra, the first argument is the key to use so that the next activity that receives this information can grab the appropriate resource. And we're putting this this item in there with the key old item and the string that we want to let the user edit. And then here I'm just kind of like trying to remind myself, oh, okay, why do I need this variable for editing item position again? Like, why do I need to set this variable at all, and what I'm going to use it for? So hopefully when I come back to my code in a week, I know exactly what I try to do here. So now I have a comment saying, oh, okay, I want to also save the position of the item we're editing so that when we come back to this activity later, we could update the appropriate item. And finally, in this last line of code, we have start activity for result. So this might be the time where like, what exactly does start activity for result mean, and why is there a 100 passed in there? So hopefully from here, I could Google something like Android start activity for result and realize that, oh, okay, start activity for result is kind of like start activity, except it's saying, oh, okay, I'm going to start an activity and I expect some data to come back to me, and the 100 is the request code. So we're going to be able to use this request code later in our activity results. So my comments just kind of remind me, oh, okay, what this line is doing. We're going to actually launch edit item activity now with the request code 100, and this request code 100 is what we're going to use in our activity result later. Now going into edit item activity, we're going to do the same thing. So this is when we already have code that works, but we're just not quite sure how it works or why it even works. So we're going to go through this and kind of see how we could tag it with comments. So the first thing is we wanted to do something like get intent, get string extra. And at this point, I might be like, what does get string extra mean? And why are we using the string old item again? And this is when I would go and Google Android get string extra intents. And then I would hopefully figure out that, oh, okay, get string extra is what you use when you want to grab data that another activity has passed you. And old item is the original key that main activity used. So we're using that same string that main activity used to grab the data that main activity gave us. And then we're using that to set the text for the edit text view. And then in our onClick listener for the save button, we wanted to grab whatever text is currently in the edit text field and send it back to main activity. And we're going to tag it with our own key. And the key is new item. And hopefully what I'm doing here is I'm Googling, oh, okay, what does set result mean? Like, why am I saying set result okay? And why am I passing it the data? Is that the thing that's going to go back to main activity? And what does finish actually do? So if you don't understand what these lines of code are actually doing, this is a great time to Google that, look up resources or guides, or ask someone about, hey, what does the finish method actually do? And now, finally, we're back in our main activities for onActivity result. And we're almost there. So now in our onActivity result, I might be thinking, what exactly is get extras, get streaming? So that's a little different from what we did in the edit item activity, right? So I might be Googling, what does Android get extras, get streaming? And why am I using the string new item there? And when I figure it out, I might write the comment that says, hey, this is us saying we want to get the edited text that was passed to us from edit item activity, and we're using this string new item because that's the same exact key that edit item activity uses, and so we have to use the same string in order to grab the right resource. And the next thing we need to do is we need to update the appropriate item in our list, and that's where we end up using the variable that we created earlier, the editing item position. So in summary, when you're trying to understand the code that you write, it's really great to start off by just thinking about what you need to do before you start to write code. So this is a great way to start because this doesn't require you to know anything about coding yet. You don't need to know anything specific about Android yet. Hopefully this is just a step where you're mapping out what needs to be done in order for something to happen. And once you have that, you can translate those steps that you need to take into comments. So you write comments and then you're like, oh, okay, these comments are where I'm going to translate into code later. And you write the comments in the appropriate classes so that you're ready to write code when the time comes. And lastly, if you have no idea where to start and you end up just trying things out and it magically works, then you want to go back and actually tag your code with comments to make sure that you know how your code is working and why it works now. So hopefully by going through that example, you have a better idea of how you can go about being really in control of all the code that you write.